Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals, September 26, 2017 review session. We'll start with the special order calendar, decision item number 1, 227-02BZ, 527 East 233rd Street, the Bronx.
So we were waiting for a submission on this and nothing was submitted, and you contacted.
I sent an email last week in response to some inquiries, and I've not yet received a response.
Right.
And we'll reach out again today.
Okay, they were supposed to be correcting the drawings. That was mostly what we were waiting for, so I can't figure out what the delay is.
Item number 2, 164-07BZ, 280 Marsh Avenue, Staten Island.
They requested an adjournment.
Continued hearings, item number 3, 413-50BZ, 691 East 149th Street, the Bronx.
They requested an adjournment to continue the review of the zoning lot subdivision issue. This has been in hearings for over a year, with the main issue being the size of the zoning lot. We actually didn't have many issues with the principal case. So, and I don't really want to keep this showing up on the calendar, so I'd like to suggest that we vote on this and close this. Well, it's closed already, right? Or is it? No, close this and vote on it, and have there be a condition, if it's approved, that they subdivide the zoning lot and tax lot, because the issue was that the variance didn't cover one of the lots. So we just wanted to get it off of the story, so we could make it clear in the resolution.
That it's only for the north.
Yes, and maybe on, I don't know if it's possible to do it on the drawing, I'd have to go look at the drawings, but on the drawing, so DOB is very much aware.
Maybe they should cross-hatch if,
Yeah, that's a good idea, to cross-hatch the drawing.
with a note that says not part of this application.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good idea, so, cross-hatch the drawing for like the outdoor ship, parcel. Okay.
Item number 4, 1016-84BZ, 790 Coney Island, Brooklyn.
We have a letter and an affidavit from the applicant indicating that it will not install a paint spray booth and will therefore not conduct any paint spraying on the site. And there was that sign frame that was removed, so.
Right.
Item number 5, 65-94BZ, 144-2 Jewel Avenue, Queens.
And this one's similar to the other one in that an adjournment was requested again. This is the 4th adjournment requested, and really, I'm not inclined to agree to it. We last heard this in January, and it's been in hearing for over a year, taking up 7 of our hearing calendar sort of allotments, which means someone else can't be heard during that time because we think they're coming and then they don't come. We asked the applicant 9 months ago to clear up issues that had to do with occupancy of the sidewalk, and we have seen no submissions on it since. I'm actually inclined to dismiss this for failure to prosecute, which would then render the use in bulk on the site illegal. So the attorney for the applicant better come tomorrow and bring the client to the hearing. And both should be ready to respond to our concerns. We can't adjourn this anymore.
Just to note, so I had a conversation with the applicant on Thursday, and in response to his request for the adjournment, and I've requested already that he'd be here, and he has agreed to. The outstanding issue, I understand, is that the signage will be brought into compliance, which is what the board had asked. I think they're working on that. I think they ran into some difficulty with the placement of the refuge storage because the lot line is on the sidewalk, and it's actually city property. So I think they're going to suggest a proposal tomorrow, and that the board would, if the board could collectively consider it. That's where I left off with the applicant on this one.
This is the one where they're actually making full use of city property for lots of this project. It's a garden on city property. They're putting the trash on city property, all that sort of stuff, and it seems like we can't approve something that's on city property unless they have a revocable consent, right? So,
They're actually proposing to put the refuge and the enclosure on the other side, the other street, in that little yard area.
as long as the yard area is
Yeah.
not on city property. So, yeah.
I believe it isn't, but he's going to address this tomorrow.
Okay, okay.
Item number 6, 159-2000 BZ, 383 3rd Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay. With respect to the buses, my notes from the last hearing show that there are 2 to 3 buses, but they provided a chart that indicates there are 5 bus routes. So is that 5 bus routes with 2 to 3 buses or 5 buses?
I thought it was 5 buses, but only 2 to 3 are around at the same time, is what I thought.
Right, that's what I,
Okay, so in other words, they're off on their route and 2 to 3 are staying, okay.
And they're kind of staggered in how they come over like a 45-minute period.
Right, okay. The plans were revised to clarify certain open issues. I just like to understand that they have a note that says side yard garbage storage that's adjacent to the little one-story structure to be legalized. Whose garbage is that, and how do they even get to it? I didn't really understand the relationship of that little spot to the one-story building. They also showed on the site plan, which is a very, very small site plan, a refrigerated trash enclosure on the northeast corner, but it doesn't show up on any of the floor plans. So that has to be installed. The applicant provided a copy also of their revocable license to occupy a portion of the adjoining property for school purposes. That portion is occupied by part of the building that's the subject to be legalized, an access or egress stair, and the play area. The building itself houses a library and an entry vestibule, so a portion of that library entry vestibule is sitting on someone else's property that is the subject of this license agreement that's revocable. So, and the other property is not on the same zoning lot as the school. So I'd like to know, since they have these uses, whether it's possible for us to include the area of the revocable license in the use variance, but with a term that travels with the term of the license. So, because if not, those elements would be in violation of zoning. They're sitting in a district where school use is not permitted. And I can't think of any other thing to do except that they'd have to be removed because they're not legal. And that's basically a piece of the building that they're seeking to legalize here, so.
That's not in the C8?
Yeah, so it is in the C8, so the portion that they're seeking to legalize, that's the school zoning lot, is in a C8, but then they kind of overstepped their boundaries and went into an area that's owned by the U-Haul Corporation, and U-Haul granted them a license to occupy that space, but said, if we ever want it back, or if we sell, deal's off, right? So in that event, the school would either have to buy that little piece, which is the likely outcome, or they would have to actually demolish a piece of their property because they're sitting on a piece of their building because they're sitting on somebody else's property.
I just don't know if under 7319 we'd be permitted to do that.
Right. Right, so we need to look into that, otherwise I don't really know what the solution is other than the school purchasing that.
It's not 7319, it's a variance.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, it's a yeah, that's right, it's a variance.
Sorry, projects.
But it's also for, right, so,
The project description's wrong.
I said 7301.
let me just,
7201 extension of term of previous agreement.
Can we-
That's fine, that's okay.
Item number 7.
wait, no,
oh,
slow down. Okay, this is an extension of term and an amendment of a variance.
Yeah.
Right. So, and then, okay, then there were some other things. Sorry. I just lost my place. Also, the plans don't show the dimensions of the license area. They just, that part sort of floats off. We need to see that area. And then I have another question, because this is a little bit of a freewheeling project in the sense that there's this overhanging marquee or canopy that projects over the sidewalk. That was shown on the previously approved BSA drawings, as was one entry stair, like a small stoop that went up into the building. But now there's this, both this marquee, which looks like it's hanging over the property line. Now there's this big caged and fenced-in enclosure right in front of the school, which is probably sitting on city property, so it's the same thing. I understand maybe why they're doing it. Well, not totally why, because it seems like that little one-story building is created as the formal entrance to the school. It's got this formal lobby, and you go in and up sort of a grand flight of stairs into the school. So I'm not really sure why they also need that whole caged-in area that's sitting on the sidewalk, but that's also a problem. Anybody else comment? No?
No.
Item number 7, 214-2000 BZ, 2761 Plum, 2nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, they asked for an adjournment to address DOB requirements for a restrictive deck on the off-site parking.
New cases, item number 8, 260-06 BZ, 112 Charlton Street, 547 Greenwich Street, Manhattan.
Okay, we have proof of service of the initial application notice of hearing to officials. Community Board 2 recommends approval. The previously approved drawings, this is for a PCE, and proposed drawings show a fire alarm system was to be installed. Was it? And if so, provide proof of installation and fire department sign off.
Item number 9, 294-06. Oh,
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Yes, slow
Sorry.
down, look at everyone to make sure they're finished speaking.
It's Monday, little slow, weird. Sorry. I just wanted also a little bit of clarification on the hours of operation, because the prior resolution had a different hours of operation, and I wanted to know if they're seeking a change. That wasn't clear. Thank you.
It's okay.
Item number 9, 294-06 BZ, 31-11 Broadway, Queens.
Okay, this is also a new application for a PCE, and we do have proof of service of initial application to officials, but I actually don't find proof of notice of hearing. If we're not supplied with that, we won't be able to hear it tomorrow, so we need that. We also need the community board recommendation, so I don't see that. And also, I'd like to include somewhere in the record, this is in our resolution, there were 2 variances issued on this property, one in 1921 and one in 1967 for use. And if there was some way that we could, they state in their materials that the uses are no longer there, hence abandoned. So effectively, we no longer have those variances existing, even though they were vested, they're now abandoned. So there should be a way to like tie up those 2 separate applications and say that they were abandoned, so if nobody's thinking they still apply to this property. Know what I mean? Okay. And also, I'd like to know the status of the violations for parking and plumbing that they said in June that they were working on. And again, the previously approved drawings and the proposed show a fire alarm system to be installed. They need to provide proof of installation and fire department sign off. Any other comments?
The drawings show that they're physical therapy spaces, and I'm assuming those are the same as massage rooms. If so, the licenses were not provided. And also, I wanted a clarification if there was any change in the proposed hours of operation. And the signage analysis was not provided and was not indicated.
Hold on a second. Okay.
Appeals calendar, decision items, item number 10, 255-15A, 106 Ebbett Street, Staten Island.
I believe that all of the corrections we requested were made. However, with respect to the front wall relative to the front lot line, We just need to be really clear in the resolution that the BSA is not waiving the required front yard distance from the property line to the front wall, and that DOB must determine whether this is an existing non-compliant condition. A note to that similar effect was already added to the site plan. I just like the belt and suspenders it, so we are really clear that that's not something we are waiving. Anything else from anybody? No?
Item number 11, 2016-4256A, 147 Stetcher Street, Staten Island.
Okay, the plans were revised to show the width and length of, oh, sorry, that's the wrong one, sorry. A restrictive deck for maintenance of the portion of the street in front of the property was provided, which was the only thing that was missing, so.
Continued hearings, item number 12, 238-15A through 243-15A, 102-4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24 Dutton Court, Queens.
They didn't submit anything on this, so,
This is the fourth adjournment, is it the fourth adjournment?
that's the third
Third
adjournment.
adjournment?
Yeah, so Dunton Court is a pretty tricky one, and I think that Tony had received some drawings, but they weren't submitted in time. So I think maybe the best thing to do would be to talk about it tomorrow, as opposed to accept an adjournment, because we don't really know why it was adjourned. And especially because I think drawings were supplied anyway, whether or not they were officially
Did they
submitted.
even officially make an adjournment request?
No, nothing.
They just didn't submit
They just
anything.
submitted it
Submitted
late.
nothing. And they gave to Tony, not through Submit, some drawings for her to look at, and I don't know what
And they
happened.
gave me a restricted deck that I reviewed
Ah,
and told them to submit. And
okay. All right, so then there is no adjournment, so that the applicant has to appear.
New cases, item number 13, 2016-4296 through 4298A, 3236, 3238 Shelley Avenue, and 580 Clarence Avenue, the Bronx.
Okay, because this is a new hearing, I state that we have proof of service of initial application and of notice of hearing to officials. According to the applicant, the community board didn't issue a recommendation even though there was a meeting. That seems like an odd thing for a community board to do, meet and not issue a recommendation, so I think that we should follow up on that. Department of Transportation states that the street is not part of the capital improvement plan. DEP did have a comment in June, which it doesn't seem to have signed off on, about the 35-foot wide sewer corridor in the bed of Shore Drive. But I saw in the drawings a note that
Yeah.
said that they were providing it, so I
And
didn't
it was
understand.
consistent with the prior BSA approval in terms of what DEP had required. The same type of documentation notations were also included in this. So I was a little confused by DEP's statement.
Right. Maybe they didn't see the drawings that we saw? I don't know. I don't know, because it looks like, because their comment was a little bit angry. They still didn't respond to our comment, right? And then we see it. So if we could just circle back with DEP. Also, this is a waterfront lot, so don't we need a waterfront consistency review? The Borough President's topo map, just to note, indicates that the property's front on legally mapped streets. I wasn't sure about that because it seemed a little Wild West-like. For residential? Oh, it's a type 2, okay, no, so type
So no need for the waterfront.
2, type 2. Okay. Let's see. Oh, the tax maps are indicating that the streets, so Cleveland and Schley, Clarence and Schley, are clipped by the private property. So I just want to clarify, it seems like it's showing that on the drawings, that the proposal is to improve the roadbed in front of these properties. So essentially, they're giving over private property to the roadbed to make it a constant 34-foot wide road. And I had one question, though, about that with respect to the sidewalks. When you connect at that spot, the builder's pavement plan is showing this sort of non-transition to the sidewalk, where you're walking along the sidewalk, you have to take a sharp right, and then you're continuing on the sidewalk. So I don't understand why, if you're building a whole new roadbed there, you don't design it so there's a gradual transition to the sidewalk, and so DOT has to look at that. And also, I'm not sure that this is complying with the side yard rules relative to the adjacent existing building, so they should verify officially in writing to us with an analysis that it complies with 23-461C4, and that DOB would allow the reduction in the total side yard width that exceeds 13 feet, because there is a rule that says if you have a side yard width of more than 13 feet adjacent to you, then your side yards have to be larger, or, right? So this existing building has very large side yards, right? So now you're reducing it to less than 13 feet. Is that a workaround, and would DOB allow that? And also, they need to make sure that the front yard depth complies with section 23-45B and C, because I don't know what the distance from the front lot line to the face of the adjacent house is, and it needs to align with that. And then in general, the zoning analysis completely ignores Article 6, Chapter 2 for waterfront blocks. It has to acknowledge that it went through that analysis and complies with it. Others?
No.
Item number 14, 2017-43 and 144A, 25-32 and 25-30, 44th Street, Queens.
Okay, so this one, they requested an adjournment, so essentially a postponement of the hearing, but it sounds like because the applicant will just file to cure the problem, so they're going to convert the building back into a two-family. I assume it's a three-family now, and they're
It is,
turning it back
yeah.
into a two. Yeah.
Zoning calendar, decision items, item number 15, 330-14BZ, 1746 East 21st Street, Brooklyn.
So this decision's been deferred previously because apparently the applicant is waiting on the outcome of another similar project at DOB. I'm curious to know what those issues are. Don't keep it a secret. Anyway, so we're just going to defer.
Continued hearings, item number 16, 56-02BZ, and item
Yes.
number 17,
Yeah.
1-96BZ, 317 Day Hill Road, Brooklyn, and 600 McDonald Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, so after reading all the papers, I read the last line where they're actually requesting an adjournment. But I don't see any reason to accept the adjournment because there were submissions, so we should discuss them. They did provide signed and sealed pre-event architect inspection reports for the month of August that shows basically a party 5 nights a week at this place with 400 guests. Always, it seems like always for weddings. They did submit a copy of the reasonable worst-case scenario that was filed at City Planning in July. Having seen that for the first time, I have to insist that they make corrections to properly represent the project. They said that there will be a request at the BSA to enlarge the building, but that's not related to the rezoning action, and I don't see how that's not a related action.
I was under the impression they were proposing a rezoning that will not only allow for change in use.
Me too.
And also modification to the bulk that would allow a more of an as-of-right use on the McDonald's side.
Right, that's what I thought they were doing
Right.
too. That was the instruction. Basically, we don't want to see you here anymore, right? And
But citus, I mean, the use is no longer the viable use that is being proposed, so I'm not sure why, while you're changing the use on the McDonald's side, why not also change the density that would allow for an as-of-right building.
Right.
Inside.
You know, it seems to me the neighbors would feel differently. The ones who came to protest might feel differently about an as-of-right building, and maybe that's why they're afraid to go there. But I also want to say that in the ULURP application materials, it says that there's a BSA action pending, unless I'm misremembering. They withdrew
withdrawn.
that. Yeah, so it is not pending.
This
That's
is the only action that's pending.
Yes,
is compliance.
we told them to withdraw, that it was not going to be considered. The building is not in compliance with the original variance, and I want to reiterate that a reapplication would not be welcome, in large part because the building is, which we said many, many times at hearings, so it's not a secret, the building is too large for the neighborhood, according to the findings that we make. And also, there's a catering facility that takes up lots of space, and if they simply filled that with the things they say they need, they wouldn't need an enlargement. So, so that whole subject of a pending application and enlargement has to be stricken from the thought process from this school. It's time to look for another facility to house the balance of the students. And with respect to the PA permit for 600 McDonald, I was asking about, at the last hearing, whether they needed a PA permit for that space. The reason I asked wasn't because occasionally they set up 20 tables and 40 men sit at the table. It's because when we go online and we look at Pinterest and all those other sites, you can see that there's parties going on in that space where there's far more than 74 people in there. Therefore, it needs to have a PA permit, otherwise they have to be strictly restricted to the 74 persons. And I don't know about fire egress because one of them requires you to go up that spiral stair. I don't know. Okay.
Item number 18, 161-15BZ, 621 East 216th Street, the Bronx.
Sorry, lots of notes. As requested, the second and third floors were pulled back from the side lot and rear lot lines to reduce the effect of the building's massing on the neighbors of the adjoining properties, and the plans were reconfigured to put the baptistry and elevator in locations that encourage better circulation and efficiency. And in the process, the multipurpose room and the large sanctuaries were reduced in size, which is something that we discussed in terms of the size of the congregation. So I think they were responsive.
I agree with you. My biggest concern was with the taller building height backing up against the lots, and I think by setting the building back on the second and on the third floor closer to the on the southern end, and then further setting back reduces that height in the rear and maintains the typical 30-foot that one sees in the rear yard without, and I think the programmatic need that they have indicated now makes it a lot clearer that why they need that 900 space on one floor, and the space that they're proposing is adequate for not just the existing but for the future growth. So I'm satisfied with the revised proposal.
I had asked the question about the simultaneous use of the rooms and whether or not they could actually cut out one of the rooms, like the multipurpose room, and they responded to my question by talking about the simultaneous use of the room and giving us a good calendar of events that shows that on Sundays between 10:30 and 1, they actually do use all of those rooms and can't do without it. And then at least they reduce the size of them, so
Great, okay,
I'm fine with it.
great, thank you.
Item number 19.
Oh, I just wanted to add that I have a note here about an earlier discussion about shuttle van service to pick up parishioners at the subway station, so I would want to make that a condition, which we talked about when we first started speaking. Okay.
Item number 19, 179-15 BZ, 129 Toffee Place, Brooklyn.
Okay, so this application was adjourned at the last hearing, but a submission was made that very same day that I thought was very responsive to our comments from the March hearing. A deed search was submitted, but it only goes back to 1967. It's supposed to indicate whether the property has been separately owned or not owned in concert with an adjoining property. So 67, they need to go back to 61. And I understand when you go to Acris, it's limited to 1967 most of the time. So then either you go to a title company or you take a trip to the city registrar's office and you dig up the prior deed. So in order to tie a ribbon around this, you really need that 61, pre-61 deed. I thought the uniqueness study was improved. And then the applicant submitted air quality data in July, and DEP signed off on that in August. Any?
I still have financial questions.
Okay.
So they did revise the as-of-right scenario to be a one-story commercial office building without a cellar, and they revised the uniqueness study. And so the as-of-right commercial building is a 1.0 FAR, 2,488 square feet. But the only problem is the plans are showing a very inefficient building. They're showing a building in which they have the offices taking up 60% of the floor plate, and about 37% of the floor plate is corridor, lobby, and bathrooms. And I'm not quite sure that you need to have that much loss factor on a very simple one-story office building that's most likely going to have one tenant, two tenants.
Right.
So I would love for them to address that, because the result of that is it really limits the amount of income, because you're only leasing about 67% of the space.
Oh, so they're showing only
Because of the
leasing that?
corridor.
You would
Yeah.
think that they would just show it as a net lease, because
Yeah,
it's
no.
going to be a one-tenant story, most likely.
Right, yeah, no, they're showing that they're only getting rent for about, I think like 15 out of 2,500, 929 square feet is not considered rentable. So basically about 1,600 square feet is all that they're getting rent for in that scenario. They also, if you look at the plans, it shows a staircase to the roof. And I'm not sure if that means that they are somehow marketing this, allowing for use of the roof. And then if so, then they need to discuss the effect on the rents for something like that.
I'm just curious whether, looking at that, whether it would be possible for them to just run the numbers on a gross area, and whether that would get any clarity.
Yeah, if they should, to me, they should just account for the space and give us some kind of a credible narrative as to what it would rent for if you extend the rent over the entire space. So, as for the apartment comparables, there's still no adjustment for size, location, or condition. They said that they took 10 comparables from the area to determine the market for the ground floor apartments, and 10 to determine the market for the upper floor apartments, and that would be enough to determine the average. And then they increased the rents for various apartments in terms of their view of desirability. However, there's no detail in the comparables in terms of the floor plans, the size and square footage, or whether or not the ground floor apartments have the cellar recreation rooms, like this case, or whether the roof access for the upper apartments is in the comparables as well to account for that. So there really isn't any way of knowing whether or not the apartments that they're using, even though they threw a lot at us, are actually similar. And while the leasing schedule shows they have used a higher than average amount for the first floor apartment, the upper floor apartments are only at the average amount, even though they probably do have roof access, as in rooftop space. So they should address that.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
New cases, item number 1, 2016-4169BZ, 230 Borum Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, we have proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. But I didn't find proof of service of the initial application to officials, although the community board did issue a recommendation. Their recommendation was disapproval, citing excessive building height and lack of affordable dwelling units. We can only get into the height, we can't get into the affordability question. We have one letter of opposition that's concerned about a project contrary to the zoning district. And there, with respect to separate and individual ownership, they do need to provide deeds for the adjacent properties to establish that they were not held in common ownership with the subject at any time since 1961. Again, if Akros doesn't go back to 61, then you have to, get on your horse and go to city register or call the title company. With respect to the comparable lots and uniqueness, based on the study, out of 80 lots in the M11 within an 800-foot radius, 44 are non-residential, of which only 8 are similarly sized lots, not held in common ownership, that are vacant or developed with one-story manufacturing buildings, which would be as of right here. So this is only one of 8 similar properties in a 800-foot radius. They should provide a map of the industrial business zone so we can understand where it is relative to where this is. With respect to neighborhood character, the building has 11-foot and 12-foot floor-to-floor heights, so is tall compared to the neighbors, and even has more floor area than permitted in the R6 to which it's being compared. So I don't understand that little extra point. I think the building really needs to be more in line in terms of height with the adjoining neighbors. The idea is not to allow it to have more than what other properties enjoy, but to put it in a similar place to those properties. And had the buildings that existed on the site, on the subject site, until the early 90s, late 80s, not been demolished, the site would have enjoyed the residential use similar to the immediate neighbors, and probably was a little building very similar in height to those. Also, unit sizes, just in terms of this, how it's designed, the unit sizes are very small at just over 400 square feet, so they border on the micro unit, even though there's no official thing called a micro unit. I don't know why, what's going on? I just want to make sure that that size of unit is justified in the neighborhood. We know in lots of places there's a need for such tiny apartments, but I don't know whether they've established that there is a market for these apartments. With respect to seeker, the DEP had comments as of September 21 about the air quality analysis, so they obviously haven't had a chance to respond to that. I don't see, you want to jump in on these? Go ahead.
Yeah, they need an updated, DEP requested an updated phase 1 for hazmat. Their phase 1 is from 2013. With appendices. The applicant was asked for this item, but they have not responded.
Okay, and also, yeah, so DEP wanted an updated phase 1, and there was a RAP that was submitted in June, so they wanted something,
Yeah.
what they submitted was old in June?
Yes.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
Okay, and then I note that this property is adjacent to a property listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So I think that in part, in terms of part of the conditions of this application would be that even though it's not a New York City landmark, that the construction work should comply with TPPN 10 of 88, which protects adjoining historic properties. It is really an old factory building that's next door, and they could easily undermine it if they don't take those kind of precautions. So, please.
I read through the uniqueness study and the way in which they're distinguishing themselves from the other lots, and while they do say there are only 8 other lots that are similar to it within the 800 square foot radius, I'm troubled by the fact that 5 of them are actually located on the same street as this lot and are as small or smaller. And so I'm still having a problem being convinced by their A finding. As far as the character finding is, I agree with you that this building is too tall, and if they are comparing themselves to the R6B, I don't think that they should even be at 2.39 FAR. They should be at the max FAR of the R6B. I have quite a few financial comments. The largest comment I have that has the most significance for this financial report has to do with the site value, and the way in which they valued the site differently for the as-of-right use and also the proposed. We don't accept different site values when we look at the financial analysis. What we do want you to do is value the site as it is as of right, with all the possibilities that you could have for this site as of right, not based on the fact that you're expecting to receive a variance. And so what happens in this financial analysis is the site value for the as of right is about $500,000, but then it jumps up to almost $1 million for the proposed, and that really affects the finances and it drives the project. So I have other issues with the site value concerning the comparables used. If you just look at the as-of-right site value. And in that case, the site, sale number 2, Jefferson Street, should actually be taken out because it's the subject of a variance for residential use prior to the sale. And so that was driving the sale price up and of course driving the site value up as well. Also, I have a question as to what they choose, what factor they're actually choosing after they look at the comparable analysis to drive their site value. So, for instance, their analysis results in an unadjusted average $200 a square foot and an adjusted average of $214 a square foot. However, they settle on $250 a square foot in valuing the site value. And so to me, that's like picking a number out of the hat and totally arbitrary. The whole point of getting comparables and then adjusting your comparables is the idea that at the end of the day, the average is representative of what your site would sell for. And so that just blows that analysis. So all in all, I think that if you make that correction alone, the as-of-right site value should go down by about $100,000, which means that the proposed site value will go down by about $600,000. If it goes down by $600,000, then the total development costs go down by $600,000, which means you need less income to make this a feasible project, which means you need less space. So this financial analyst actually does an interesting thing in that they add to their analysis a check on their values by doing a comparable sales analysis option to find out what the site value would be. And I believe it's so that to show that if both the industrial building sales analysis as well as their own site value plus development cost analysis comes in around the same amount as what the building would sell for, then their value is right, more or less. And for the industrial building sales, that works. However, for the residential scenario, they are off by about $1 million because of the adjustment of the site value downward. In terms of their residential apartment comparables, comparable number 2, which is a studio, comparable number 5, which is a 2-bedroom, and comparable number 3, which is a studio, comparable 5, which is a studio, and comparable number 4, which is our 1-bedroom, are in buildings that appear to be poor condition and appear to be industrial use buildings, which makes me, doubt the fact that these are even legal apartments, and certainly they don't appear to be comparable. And I think what they're doing is they're acting as a pressure downward on the amount of income that this project could get. And so I also have a question about the residential expense ratio. The expense ratio is 33%, and a large portion of that expense ratio has to do with the real estate taxes. They're taking taxes per square foot for what they say are comparable buildings, and they end up with about $3.11 per square foot for real estate taxes. And then for some reason, unbeknownst to me, they then jump up to using $7.50 a square foot in expenses, which is then leaving a much lower net operating income. So once again, if you're going to give me comparables that suggest something, I don't understand why you're then doubling that amount. It's not really based on anything. If it turns out that they feel that newer buildings pay higher real estate taxes, then their comps should be newly built buildings. So then we can at least see that their assumption is correct. So until they make those corrections, they can't really prove that they've made the B finding, and they certainly haven't proven that they've made the E finding.
Right.
So we need to see more.
Yes.
So with regards to this study, as I reviewed the uniqueness, and when I went to the site and I was looking at some of these sites, what was interesting is the list that the applicant had provided, they were indicated as these are, like specifically the ones that are on that block front of Borum, indicated as one-story buildings. Once you go to the site, and also from the Google view, these are more than one story. These are 2 stories. Now, so I was curious and I started doing Google search and to see what really they are. Like, are there photos of the building interior, whatever. So what's interesting is based on these searches, the applicant, I shouldn't be doing this. The applicant should be doing this to help them make their argument. So for example, 257 Borum is on the market for sale. And it has a beautiful residential quarter on the 2nd floor with a gallery space below. And this is a full lot coverage 2-story building. So it's definitely more than one FAR. And the photographs are beautiful if you look at the interior of it. 251 Borum Street. It appears that this is the building that's shown in the photographs as if it's in construction. When you do more of a Google view, you can see there's a mezzanine that's being built. So even though the BIS documents indicate this is a 1-story building, it is 1 plus and something. So again, it's built more than the 1 FAR permitted. 248 Borum, same thing, it's a 2-story full lot coverage building. Now, whether it's full lot on the 2nd floor, I don't know, but there are windows both on the side lot line, on the front lot line, so maybe it's again a mezzanine. But again, that adds to the floor area, so it's more than 1 FAR. 251 Montrose Avenue also is a full lot coverage building with a partial 2nd floor. Are these accessory, now that we are getting familiar with what is accessory use, are these accessory uses? Are these more than 1,200 square feet or not? I think those will also be critical to understand. Therefore, if they're accessory uses, then it's 1 FAR. But if they are not accessory uses, then it's more than 1 FAR.
No, wait a minute, accessory use counts as floor area. It's simply that it's allowed in a
It's
manufacturing district.
Right.
Yeah.
But in this case, they're built more than 1 FAR. Because of the fact these are full lot coverage on the ground floor and the 2nd floor, most of the cases they're full lot or partial or whatever. So I think the applicant needs to do more analysis on this uniqueness study to identify, go deeper, go through the buildings department, go through more site search and find out what really is going on in these buildings. Because when I went to the site, they look like 2-story buildings to me. So I thought, well, maybe more light and air. But upon more digging, there might be a 2nd floor there. So that is something that I want the applicant to revise and help us understand where the uniqueness lies. I think if what I see, then they do have a case for uniqueness. Because these 1-story manufacturings are actually not 1-story manufacturing, they're more than 1 FAR. And maybe a 1-story, 1 FAR manufacturing is not viable. I don't know. I mean, is that what the story is telling based on these buildings that are there? I don't know. But the uniqueness study definitely needs to be revised
I mean, we have in some cases, I don't know if this is the appropriate case, but we have in some cases said, rather than residential, get another one FAR or something of commercial, and then you have a viable project. Because one of the things that the uniqueness study said was, I'm not well, I think that might have been that was a different case, but in another case where there was adjacency to an M12, where there was 2 FAR, the same analyst said, oh, but an M12 is much better off because now you get 2 FAR, so you can't compare it to where we are, right? So if 2 FAR is the breaking point that turns all of these little sites into something viable, then that's a different thing. And in the interest of not losing manufacturing uses in manufacturing districts, it's something that I think the board should be really aware of. In this case, because you have so many residential uses on the block, and there was a residential use originally, maybe that's a different analysis, but.
So interestingly, you say that. I reached out to the Department of City Planning, and this is within the North Brooklyn Industry and Innovation Plan area.
It is.
It is, however, as part of this plan, they are going to carve out areas that has predominant residential uses and make them more conforming to the uses. So this would be that block front that would be recommended to a zoning district that would be more in conformance with the use. And when I was narrating the building form and other things and the height, they said, well, it's kind of close to the R6B, which is what they would think would be appropriate. And
so this is similar to another case we had recently.
Depot.
It's right, yeah.
It's similar. It also is the same industrial and
Innovation.
right.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing. And then because the community had raised the question of affordability, and I know it's not in our purview, I asked them, would the MIH kick in with if the R6B was zoned? It would, however, it would screen out small sites like this. So MIH will not be applicable to such sites.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Item number 2, 2016-4276, BZ 333 Johnson Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, parking reduction. So we have proof of service of initial application to officials, but I actually didn't find notice of hearing in the file or of the community board recommendation. So unless we get that in the file, we can't hold a hearing on this tomorrow. So I scoured the file, didn't find.
So we want the community board recommendation also for hearing?
No,
or
no,
just
community
the-
board has time,
Right.
but certainly.
The notice of
The
hearing.
notice of hearing is essential. We can't have a hearing if there wasn't notice.
Right.
And I just want to note, I think it's to Darrell, that the proposed and existing plans are sitting in a void folder. We need those. They need to be moved back into the application folder. That's where they are. They were voided and they got moved out because the applicant only submitted 2 plans to replace 2. So they should have submitted a complete set of plans, never submit just a floating plan. So that ended up getting into the main folder. So they essentially need to swap out those 2 plans and then put the whole thing back into the main folder. So that's why you couldn't figure out how to get to the second floor, for example.
Yes.
Right? Which brings up, my question is, just generally from a design perspective, why is the parking being located on the second floor as opposed to the first? I thought it might have to do with wanting to do kind of a court, a commercial court, so that you're seeing commercial space opening up into that court area, but they don't tell you that, so.
Where is the at-grade parking?
There is
Because I
no
looked
at-grade.
at the one, I
There
thought they
isn't.
said
It's like
there
a
are gonna be
ramp.
63 spaces at grade.
Yeah,
Maybe I'm
that's
looking
true.
at the wrong thing?
No,
Am I looking
yeah,
at the
so
I
wrong
think
project?
the way I understood it, the ad grade, what they mean is the ones that are not going to be on stackers.
Like non-stacked?
Yes, that's
what they
right,
mean?
simple spaces.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
kept looking on the plot
Yeah.
plan doesn't look like there are any spaces
Right,
hatched out
right.
here.
No, that's true. It's a simple
Okay.
spaces.
I like that term, simple spaces
Simple and
versus.
stacked. Well, like
Or
simplex,
singletons
duplex.
or something, I don't
Simpletons,
know.
right. Simplex, duplex, that's why, okay. So, we don't have an as-of-right version that was submitted to us, but, the parking analysis states that the required parking would be located in the subcellar. So there is no subcellar plan, so I'd like to know how this would have been accomplished if this is an existing building with a cellar to be vertically enlarged. So really, if we didn't grant this special permit, where would all that parking go? You could, of course, add more stackers to those 63, but that doesn't double your parking demand. So, or the parking inventory. The parking analysis shows that even with the proposed reduction in parking spaces and applying modality splits from the Domino Sugar EIS, which finally, in this case, seems to be more similar to the demographic, right, this site. At the highest point of demand, there will be 139 empty spaces. So consequently, I think the analysts concluded that no on-street parking analysis would need to be
Right.
conducted, which seems reasonable. We have a DEP air quality and noise sign-off. DEP reviewed the Phase 2 and requires a wrap and chasp be prepared. I don't know whether DEP saw the post and shell, that's the environmental lawyers' May 10th, 2017 submission, where they argue against doing a Phase 2. So I just want to know whether DEP considered that. They may have discounted it because it is, after all, an industrial site. And in the April response to the notice of comments, the response states that there will be no in-ground disturbance. I don't see how you add 7 stories to a building without putting in new columns that disturb the ground. So that seems like a very strange statement unless it's made out of, hung by sky hooks. So, other comments?
First of all, the zoning chart is blank.
Oh,
Secondly, is I wanted to confirm the width of the ramp. And because I want to make sure that the width of the ramp is wide enough for two-way vehicular flow, especially like during midday when the split is mostly, I think it's 60-40 in and out. There is enough space for that movement to happen, and that the length of, especially during the morning, if that length that they're saying is adequate, it can have 9 reservoir spaces. Will that be adequate to minimize any queuing onto Johnson Street?
Isn't the valet meeting them at the street level?
No, it's at the top of the ramp.
I thought they said that the valet was actually going to meet the car at the entrance.
okay,
I think we would
need
need clarification.
Yeah.
The drawing was not very clear, but from
Right.
the reading, I gathered that it was, once you reach the top of the ramp, that's where the attendant booth is, you hand over. Now, given the number of vehicles that will be coming during morning peak, it would be good to know how many attendant members will be there, because you need quick turnarounds of these, but there's enough empty spaces, so I'm assuming it won't be like too much of maneuvering that one would have to do to get to those vehicles.
So if you're driving up to the top, then how do you get out of the parking garage? Do you walk? I don't.
Well, that's why I want to know if this is wide enough for two-way.
No, I mean, how does a pedestrian walk?
I thought it would be the stairs and there's an elevator.
So then they're walking in the middle of moving.
Yeah, that's.
So we do need a pedestrian
Yeah,
walkway. Good point. We need a pedestrian walkway, ensuring there's a pedestrian safety zone to these staircases and elevator banks. Unless there is a pedestrian ramp along the ramp, we don't know.
Yeah, but that's also a drag. You drive up a ramp and then you have to walk down a ramp. That's got cars in two directions.
Them
Yeah.
at the bottom.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
I just don't remember what it says. Because where's the?
The attendant booth is not shown here. It's not shown here.
Oh, it's shown on the, It's shown
Oh,
on
it's
the
shown on
first
the
floor
other.
plan that you don't have.
Oh, okay, let me,
Well, look in the void, yeah.
that's the old one.
That's existing.
That's the only one I have? That's the only thing I have?
No,
in the
existing and
board.
proposed are all
They're all the s-
together.
Oh, oops, I closed under the, sorry. Oh, proposed, there it is.
Oh, that's just the site, so you need to go to.
Let's see. Where is this?
Also
Second floor.
existing, yeah. Sorry. Anyway, so we
need
just
to
need to
review this.
clarify where the booth is. I know it's shown on the drawings, I just can't remember where. And also where the pedestrians go, how they get around.
Oh, there is the
Okay.
proposed center.
Any other comments on this? Okay. Okay.
Oh, no, you're
Item-
right, I stand corrected.
Well, sorry?
Attendant booth is right at the entrance.
It's at the entrance, so you just,
Right.
because what they said was they would drive the car up the ramp, and then there would be a few more spaces that could hang out
Right.
there. So then the
Then-
pedestrians are,
Then the location of the attendant booth doesn't make sense if there is the reservoir space on the ramp, because then somebody's driving up and you're handing over the key, then you have to come back all the way down.
no, you keep the key.
No, but they have to park the car, right? The attendant has to park the car.
And they keep
come
the
in.
key in
They
the car.
keep the key. They don't hand the key back to the driver.
No, so my question is, you come up and you leave your car right here and the attendant just parks it up to the
Yeah,
front
the attendant,
and the
there's
reservoir?
presumably 2 or 3 guys who are
Okay, I
working,
think that
one
the
grabs the
operation
car.
needs to be
Okay,
much
so we
clearer.
need more
I thought I
information
individually
on
will go up all the way to the top of the ramp, hand over the key, walk away, and the attendant there takes care of it. That's what I thought.
Operations, okay. Okay.
Item number 3, 2017-102 BZ, 2015 East 5th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay. We have proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. However, I don't find proof of service of the initial application to the officials, although Community Board 15 did submit their recommendation, which was 30 in favor and 3 opposed. We have 2 letters of support, and there's a 1930 Sanborn map that shows the house was configured basically the way it is now with existing side and front yard non-compliances. Of course, it's never dimensioned, but it gives you an idea that it's hanging very close to one side. Based on the seller plan provided, there are, this is really a threshold question, there are no walls to remain in the cellar. That's inconsistent with the demo set that was provided. The first floor also shows a continuous south wall to remain, layered over or under, depending on how you read it, the new construction in a different location. So I like to understand how is that existing to remain. I'm not basically seeing any existing walls to remain. The north wall has very little existing material to remain and is also not persuasive as new construction is backed up against it. On the second floor, very little of the exterior walls are believably to retain, with some in closets, running through a shower actually, and in front of windows. So the showering experience is quite novel.
And it's also, a lot of them are surrounded by new walls, it looks like,
Yeah.
right? They're encased in them.
So, if there's some idea about decorative enclosure or whatever, then show us a detail. Because at the moment, it looks like a total demo job. And you can have little bits of walls count towards retention of existing materials. Contrary to the statement of facts, the front yard is proposed to be increased from 13 foot 4 to 15 feet. So that's incorrect, and the statement of facts should be corrected. The proposed front porch, therefore, would be new. So DOB needs to sign off on this as a permitted obstruction. There's already a note on the drawings to that effect, and also to the effect of the greenhouse in the rear yard. This is an area where the 20-foot rear yard is as of right. This is a proposal to reduce the existing 3-foot 5-inch side yard to 2 feet. The minimum total side yard width for this area is 10 feet. So unless I'm misunderstanding, this would be under the required minimum combined width of a foot, by a foot.
Yes.
Also, there is a minimum of 8 feet required between buildings on adjacent zoning lots pursuant to paragraph C of 23-461. Statement of facts incorrectly refers to 23-401, needs to correct that. So they just need to show that this distance is provided or no increase in noncompliance is proposed with respect to that. I do have to say, though, the plans are quite confusing compared to what it says in the statement of facts. So they actually seem to indicate that the side yard on the north will be increased from 7 foot 5 inches to 8 feet, which would then provide for the total of 10 feet. But then that's 5 inches away from where it currently is, so that sounds like a total demolition just right there if you do the math. And similarly, with a reduction in the south side yard to 2 feet from 3 foot 5 inches, that's 1.5 feet away. So how is that retaining an existing wall? So far, I'm not persuaded we get past the first threshold. Also, does the proposed enlargement comply with the special district regulations, zoning resolution section 113-543 and 55 for straight line extensions of existing buildings, because we don't have the right to waive any of that. So they need to go through those findings. Also, with respect to the perimeter wall height, that, according to 73-622, is to be measured at the lowest point before a setback or pitched roof begins. Here, what they're doing is they're taking the measurement to the underside of the eave, so they kind of measure up the masonry that's tucked behind the eave. That's not the beginning of the pitch. The pitch is down here. So my understanding, because often you take an eave and you return it on the bottom, so you wouldn't see the masonry or wherever hiding underneath the eave. So I think they're measuring to the wrong point, and if they want to argue that they're measuring to the right point, they need something from DOB, because that's not been our experience here.
And I think if they measure that, then they're well under the, whatever the requirement is.
Yes.
So, but I think looking at the definition of perimeter wall, it says this a space that is completely enclosed without any cropping, as I would call it. And so they, I don't know if they were looking at the interior wall space, which allows for a minimum 8 feet all throughout, and that the interior wall does have that, though the wall is the roof is pitching like that, the wall and the ceiling is exactly at that right angle. So based on that, I think they were measuring the perimeter wall. So it was not quite clear, but either way, I think if they use the eave, then they
seem to be
they seem to be
within, yeah.
I had some questions. One of the things was that they don't meet the side yard requirement, and that was not included in the DOB objection.
Right.
But
that's
the
because-
minimum 10 feet.
Yeah.
So that was.
It's because the applicant usually writes the objections, so. No, actually, I think it was included, the minimum 10-foot was included in the objection. I need to check, but we don't waive that, so it's. Right.
Sorry, my note was the DOB did not include the front yard, and which is a confusing one. Because in the plans they're saying, and in the statement, the applicant is saying they're maintaining a 13-foot. The required is 15. Sections of the plans are showing 15-foot.
Right.
Now, if it is 13-foot that they're proposing, which is the existing front yard, then that needs to be included in the DOB objection sheet, because it's a non-compliant front yard.
Well, they're not increasing the degree of
It's a
noncompliance.
legal non.
Yeah, we don't have any authority to waive the front yard, so
But
if they were keeping
right.
it, it's just an existing ground floor.
Typical, doesn't DOB list every objection, whether it's legally non-complying, everything, just to kind of as a footnote?
Well-
That gets back to who wrote the objection.
Yes.
Right.
So the applicants typically write the objections, and they're writing them for the specific waivers sought.
Okay.
We can't waive the front yard at all, so whether they have an objection for it, really, it's not our business.
Irrelevant, okay.
We can't
However,
help
if that's
them.
the case, the drawings indicate that they're making a 15-foot
Yes.
front yard. Whereas, where the zoning zoning charts shows it as 13, and the statement of fact also states it as 13.
That's
so
why
that
it's
needs to
so
be corrected.
confusing. You're reading along, and then you look at the drawings, and you see that they're actually moving the front wall back,
Right.
which is actually one reason why you don't have as much existing material retained. But they should move it back because it's more consistent with the neighborhood character.
The other question I had was with the extension of the attic space in the rear. I'm not sure if that enlargement in the rear is within the permitted height and setback of under section 23-631. I think that's space, that's the storage space that is extending out, maybe within that height and setback, if one were to measure the setback starting from the perimeter wall height.
What, 23 what?
631.
Okay. Do you have other comments?
No.
No? I also said, was looking at the proposed FAR of 1.22. I think it's high compared to the other houses on the social block, which are more in the 1.07 range. However, I do note that that this neighborhood is really characterized by houses that sort of seem to be bursting their edges. It's like they really are kind of bulky compared to the size of their lots. So they should, but because of these comments about existing fabric and about the minimum required side yards, that'll lower the FAR because they are going to have to manipulate this design some in order to comply with those two minimum requirements. Okay.
Item number 4, 2017-190 BZ 23-11 31st Road, Queens.
Okay. We have proof of service of initial application to officials and proof of notice of hearing to officials and neighbors. Community Board 1 recommends approval. Councilmember Constantinidis also recommends approval. We have 1 letter in opposition and 3 letters of support. Opposition opposes the height increase. The supporters rarely tell you why they're in support. We also have a sign-off letter from DOB's floodplain administrator. Thank you for doing that because it makes it a lot easier for the review. With respect to lot shape, this is about the A finding. The lot is actually only slightly irregular in that its lot lines are not perpendicular, or whether or not this is the only lot in the neighborhood with obtuse or acute corners does not necessarily mean that the lot suffers a hardship as a result of it. So without more, that doesn't fulfill the A finding for a uniquely burdened lot. Just because you look a little odd doesn't mean you can't build a perfectly desirable building on the lot. With respect to the core of this A finding argument, this is a proposal to expand the Cornell doctrine, which has been applied at the BSA and in zoning appeals boards in other municipalities in New York State and supported in the courts, applied to houses of worship, educational facilities, and hospitals that are connected to degree-granting university programs. And I add, we've also had other kinds of educational facilities that have a degree-granting program affiliated with a university to which the board has applied this. And it's the expansion of the doctrine would be applied to 100% low-income supportive senior housing project to be developed by a not-for-profit housing development organization with a long history of developing low-income housing. I thought the applicant does a very thorough analysis of the basis for the Cornell doctrine, which is grounded in constitutional and statutory preferences and mandates aimed at supporting the education and morality of its population. The analysis then makes what I believe is a fairly natural link between the public policy initiatives that have been put in place over the decades by government aimed at supporting and defending religious and educational institutions and development of buildings designed to facilitate institutional goals, to similar public policy initiatives aimed at housing the homeless and the underprivileged and encouraging the provision of affordable housing. We know very well that the provision of affordable housing, especially low-income housing that is truly affordable, is a major focus of New York City's current administration, as it has been under previous mayoralties, as well as for New York State and federal administrations. I think what makes the proposed expansion of the doctrine appropriate in this case is the fact that this applicant, Catholic Charities, has a very long history of developing and managing 100% affordable housing for low-income New Yorkers, and that its primary focus as an institution is providing and maintaining this type of low-income housing. It's also important that under Catholic Charities' mandate, the housing provided will remain affordable in perpetuity. Otherwise, a bulk variance would not be appropriate since it lasts for the life of the building. I believe the expansion of the doctrine for cases like this one is one way to respond to the clear housing emergency we are faced with at present in New York, and that the doctrine depends on such an emergency situation to be able to state that it is fulfilling a public need. I also believe that such an expansion should never be expanded to include not-for-profits without a long history of affordable housing development and management, so like not good for newcomers, or to projects that will not remain 100% affordable in perpetuity to low-income New Yorkers, or to for-profit developers where only portions of the project are to be allocated to low-income renters. As I said, the applicant makes a strong argument for expansion of the doctrine to include the development of affordable housing for low-income New Yorkers. The applicant has not, however, made any argument, nor do I think it can or should, to support the expansion of the doctrine to allow for a parking lot where none is required, or for a senior center that is open to the public at large. The applicant should note that in a prior case which allowed educational deference to a portion of the building, that was Settlement House, the provision of an extra floor to provide for home health aid services, undoubtedly a desirable community service but not an educational one, did not fall within educational deference, but was permitted by this board because the site also was burdened by unique subsurface conditions that prevented cellar excavation. There do not appear to be any unique physical conditions that could be relied upon here to support a programmatic preference that falls outside of the provision of affordable housing for low-income seniors. So the high water table or floodplain is certainly not a unique condition. The 4% support services that are required under Section 1210 of the zoning resolution are understood as integral to the AIRS project, so I'm not contesting the 4%. I am contesting the application of the deference to the senior center. With respect to the E finding, or actually maybe we should go to stay with the A and go to the B. There isn't a B, but stay with the A. So other comments with respect to the A? Yeah.
Well, I'm in agreement with you in questioning whether or not the deference should be extended to the parking lot, especially since the whole reason why we're talking about affordable housing on this actual site is because the applicant made the argument that parking is no longer required for those AIRS units adjacent, and so therefore, while this used to be accessory parking for that building, its use is no longer necessary or required, so therefore it can actually be developed upon. So I don't know how you could take that argument and argue for no parking being necessary and then turn around and say, but wait a minute, for this, all of a sudden parking is necessary. So I have a problem with the logic in that argument. So, and I also have a question as to the senior citizen community center and whether or not that might be driving the e-finding. And when you're ready to get to the e-finding, I would talk about that.
Did you have others on the A?
I did not have issue with extending deference to the senior center and the parking lot on the grounds that the current utilization of the parking lot, I would like the applicant to clarify it, as to what is the current utilization of the parking lot. And from my site visit, it seems those who were accessing it were coming from the Catherine Sheridan Residence 1, and it seemed like they were residents of the building who were taking the car out. So if there is a certain amount of need for some parking for the senior citizens to be able to park on site, which minimizes their ability to have to look for on-street parking and minimizes the burden of them getting parking violations and what other things, I think that's a reasonable thing because that's part of the program. And the question is how much is that space that is needed. And the senior center, from my past experience at HPD, we have seen always senior housing projects with senior centers because these senior centers are integral to the lives. They're kind of integral life source of these senior housing. Many of them are singles living by themselves. This becomes the space where they have a social program throughout the day and where they meet and hang out with their friends. They often don't want to invite their friends into their room because maybe they're not kept well or whatever, but this is the place where they all meet, hang out. And this is from our conversations with the social service providers and senior housing providers that we had gathered when we were at HPD. So I do not have an issue extending that deference to the senior center and the parking, though I think the parking could be reduced a little bit to allow a little bit more space for the senior center. With that said, I thought of the idea of why couldn't you extend the second floor or the third floor over the parking lot. Though in your argument you had said that adds to the cost of construction, I think if you reduce the parking space, then putting some columns on the parking lot, I think these are block and plank construction, so maybe that's why the cost of spanning over that section of the parking lot is adding to the cost. But if you reduce that area of the parking lot, you might be able to extend the floor plate a little bit on the second floor and maybe provide some of the smaller common spaces that you have on the ground floor. Maybe you can scatter one or two on the upper floors where locals can gather in their little space. Though programmatically, I've heard that that's a hit or miss. It depends. Some use it, some don't. You don't want them to be in an isolated corner. You want them in a more of an area where everybody's seeing. So if something happens, you have constant eyes and ears on the senior members, residents in the area. So that may not work, but that may help you get a couple of more units on the lower floors and then maybe reduce the 7th floor footprint a little bit, and if that saves in the cost of construction and without losing any number of units, that could be looked at. That was my approach to the uniqueness. I did not have an issue with those two because I think they really do go hand in hand, the senior center with senior housing, and especially of this size. And if they're going to share the senior facility with the abutting Sheridan 1 building, and that's another question is like, do they have a program there and would this be shared? And then the space of that size would be needed.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to go back to this deference extension. I want to tread really, really carefully here because the next application will be, why can't we have a catering facility that's gets deference because it's customarily found or something like that, right? Or why can't we have, I don't know, a macrame center because macrame centers are really great for the psychological health of I don't know what. Or and I think that we do need to look at how we're taking a sort of a risk here and expanding. This is not something that the courts have ever dealt with, never, right? So, so this is the very first time that we would be looking at shifting the doctrine over to another kind of a use and justifying that doctrine shift in the same kind of basis that educational and religious deference has been, in that there's basically constitutional mandates to provide those, allow for those things in our culture, right? And so we have constitutional statutory mandates to provide low-income housing in our culture, but no constitutional mandates to provide an independent senior center, because the zoning requires, and you got the statutory mandate, the zoning requires 4% of the floor area, or whatever it is, to be used for services. So it's not like you don't have a senior center in here. It's a senior center that's specifically for the residents. And so I don't disagree that in supportive housing, you need to have support. This is supportive housing. But what we're talking about is adding an entirely new use and extending deference to a new use for which there is no constitutional or statutory basis. And I'm really nervous about what we're going to see next. If we open it up to this one, then look out, because there's so many other things. Yeah, go ahead.
I also want to add to that they do have, like you said, they have their own supportive spaces that are specific to this development. They've got 5 rooms, 3 of which are over 500 square feet, that are devoted to recreational and common area space. So they will be able to provide those areas for seniors to come and work on activities together, eat meals together, and that sort of thing. They don't need the community center. The community center is really geared towards the neighborhood.
Right, the neighbor. And, again, the other building, Sheridan 1, has the opportunity to renovate and include this use in their building. And the reason I'm saying that is because, again, we're doing something for the very first time here that I hope will be made available to other not-for-profit housing developers with 100% low-income housing. But I don't want to see those not-for-profit developers say, and we have to have basketball courts. And we need to, because each supportive housing type has something where you could justify that if we don't have basketball courts, for example, or a sports facility, or a gym, which we see in schools, right? And as was pointed out at one of our other hearings, the Cornell deference used to just be a use waiver. It was simply to prevent neighborhoods from disallowing schools and houses of worship in their neighborhoods, period, right? And it has slowly expanded by the BSA and probably by other zoning boards to include bulk waivers. So it is getting expanded, and it's kind of like, whoa. If we're going to do this, we have to tread really, really carefully. So, I encourage you to think about the ramifications. Like, it's one thing about this project, but I'm always concerned about the next guy who comes. Yeah.
First of all, I think I'm sure there was some thought put into considering extending it, and I think it's a good idea. And it's good to see that we have a project of this to start that ball rolling. I also would like, as you were saying this, I'm thinking of some of the projects that we have extended the Cornell doctrine. And so, for example, religious institutions, oftentimes they have these spaces in the cellar where they use for various programs. We have often questioned why that is needed, because but these are gathering spaces. This is a space where they gather, they have classes and other things, and we have let that be. I see this as very similar to that. You have a population that is not very mobile, a population that needs constant vigilance and socializing. It's an integral part of their health and safety and lifeline. And that for that space, smaller spaces, while it takes care of the individual need for meeting their family members or the doctors or the social worker or caseworkers, it still is not the same as hanging out with your friends and doing other programming.
But
that are
isn't that what
programmed by
the
this.
zoning anticipated by saying 4%? Zoning anticipated this specific need, which it's obviously basing on discussions with senior center providers, senior housing providers, because there was a recent change in the zoning specifically oriented to these
Right.
senior housing, where they added that requirement of supportive space. So how are the people on site, that's what we're talking about, the people on site's needs not being met by the 4%. Just to be clear, we're talking about an off-site facility. So it's the same thing as in Settlement House, where we had an accessory school facility with gyms and all kinds of computer programs and all that sort of stuff for kids, right? And then sandwiched in there was the home aid, that organization that helps locate home health aides to people's homes, right? And so that was sandwiched in, and then somehow part of Settlement House's mandate, but had no educational tie-in, right? And so the only reason we were able to allow for that increase in the height of the building to include that was because they were sitting on a very unusual rock situation. And so we could say, okay, you get a floor, and the floor gets devoted to this, because you've got a unique physical condition, it gets devoted to that one use there. But the rest gets educational deference there, and educational deference says a gym needs to be X high and all that stuff, right? Here, we have the deference going to the specific housing for this particular population with the supportive space that comes with it for the population, and then being asked to look at an outside facility that is not intended only for the population. In fact, they need to leave and come in, right, to go into it. But for the community at large, yeah, that's the way it works, that they have to leave the lobby and come into the lobby of the senior center. There's only a convenience store, which arguably would be kept closed for security purposes.
And its size is driven by the size of more than just the population of this building.
Yes. So that's the thing. Okay, so I think we made that, we're talking about this. I'm extremely concerned about it because you can think of so many other kinds of ancillary uses that are open to the public at large, and I don't want like a restaurant to be included in deference or those kinds of things. Like, why not? Because you need a restaurant in order for life to feel more fulfilling. There, many kinds of outside services that could be desirable in a building.
I think the funders will balk.
Only because the
Propose
funders will
something
walk.
like
But that's not the reason,
But I think there are also, if it's any, the housing, HPD, and a lot of these funding organizations, they have very strict design guidelines because they also don't want the money to be spent in such what you want, sometimes we would call it frou-frou things, right? You don't want these kind of frilly things to be spent on just because it looks nice. They want to spend it on just enough to meet the need of the population that is living there. And even with supportive housing, I think there was a very thorough analysis that was done that indicated how much of space, percentage of space that should be given for social programming for the number of units you have. So there was like a proportional amount that was laid out. And this might be worth it to ask HPD in terms of what similar kind of programming or other things or any of these other programmings have. I mean, that might, if that is of any use for our better understanding of it, is this amount that's being proposed, is it significantly more, or is it more in keeping with what they have seen in any of the other programs?
significantly more for affordable housing, because this is not part of the affordable housing project. This is a separately funded development.
The programming of it is being funded through DIPTA, as I understand it.
Right.
The construction of it is through all the various clobbered together financing programs.
Right. Well, that's another thing that we'll talk about.
That's my
So-
understanding.
Right. Okay, but so let's move on to I think we've discussed this at length, and everyone needs to think about this very carefully in terms of the future, not just in terms of the present, okay? Right. So, I'm jumping to the E unless anyone has the letter before that. This building is located in a floodplain, but grade is apparently at the level of design flood elevation, so the first floor is actually habitable. Given that, there isn't a technical reason for the first floor to be devoted entirely to community facility use and parking, although the statement of fact seems to imply that there is. So to be clear, if this were in a floodplain where grade is 5 feet lower than design flood, it'd be a totally different discussion because you can't occupy the ground floor, right? So you could put a community center in there on that floor, I think, because FEMA regulations, I don't think limit community facility at that level. I'm not 100% sure about that, but anyway. So, because you're not in the cellar, you're at grade and you're below design flood, but that's not the case here. Grade and design flood are the same. So, so by using the first floor as entirely community facility, you're lifting the building, bless you, 15 feet higher than it actually arguably needs to be. Further, even with the parking, picks up on Commissioner Shanda's comment, why doesn't the building extend the full length of the zoning lot as in the as of right? That would further reduce the height and provide about 15,000 square foot floor plates. Also, why is there a need in the as of right for double height clearance for the parking lot entry? The ceiling height is 11 feet there, so I don't know why. It's not like you have stackers or anything in the as of right. You're just driving right underneath a little tunnel, and in the proposed, it could be the same if we could actually get to this place for parking being something that should be included, which I'm not at all persuaded about, other than maybe to park the vans for the social services that are for the specific residents. You still don't need a double height space to do that. We often see parking garages with 11-foot high ceilings, and then they tell us, oh, it's not high enough to put a stacker. Right? So I'm not getting that at all. With respect to the community center without the parking, which isn't required, the center wouldn't need a rear yard waiver if it extended over the parking lot. So to the extent that the center might be considered within this subject and isn't driving the waivers at the moment, the senior center is totally driving the rear yard waiver. So, you could argue that if the senior center were there and not driving waivers, then it's a different discussion. But at the moment, it seems to be driving waivers. Also, the statement of facts states that the as-of-right senior center would be undersized, hence not funded by the Department for the Aging. Yet the proposed states that the center is provided to serve the residents of Catherine Sheridan 1 and the subject site. So I ask, with a reduction from 93 units for the proposed to 65 units for the as-of-right, wouldn't the number of residents using the center go down and hence reduce the required size of the center? According to the chart that was provided, a 6,500 gross square foot center is more than adequate for 200 persons, so why wouldn't Department of the Aging support that? It's just that it's designed for fewer residents. Also, Section 1210 allows the 4% recreation area for the residents to be used by the community, so why can't that area be counted for the total in the senior center? So that seemed to be like double dipping on the argument, that you're providing a separate 4% plus the senior center, where arguably the uses are overlapping. And I'd like to understand from where the information on that chart is obtained. It has no source info. What are the DIFTA center requirements actually? Further, the rear yard obstruction and parking lot both deprive the residents of access to green open space. There was an open space analysis in the EAS, which talks about the deprivation of open space. And here, there's no place actually for these residents to just sit outside and enjoy the sun. It's either sharing with a car, or there's not even a proposal to have sitting outside on the roof of the existing building, of the extension into the rear yard. So I actually don't understand that in terms of providing for the residents. With respect to the parking, this is all about the E findings, so about eliminating those things, because I don't think we're at the minimum variance. The BSA special permit allowed for off-site required parking on this site to accommodate Sheridan 1. This application states that the parking is for the staff of the community center and the residents of this building. So what happened to the parking for Sheridan 1? Because it used to somehow be in the story, and it's no longer in the story. A memo on financing was provided, but I need more to understand the critical mass. The memo is very conclusory and does not explain how 94 units becomes the critical count that makes the project work. Why not 75 units or 83 units or 90 units? So there must be a method one uses to arrive at the critical point, which I'll let Commissioner Otley Brown speak about more. So for example, the amount of funding per unit, or construction costs per unit, or management costs per unit, et cetera. Programming/financing needs of the building size and unit count has to be demonstrated to support the minimum variance argument. And then I'll talk about seeker at the very end. Others on the E, or any other letter before that?
Yeah, I'm going to speak on E. So, like you said, the key issue in terms of units is what is that critical number of units that makes this an attractive, feasible project? And you also have to discuss that while also talking about the effect of the senior center and what the possible effect it might have on those numbers. So basically and I'm going to just read my statement. The E finding has to be met, and since the economics of not-for-profit housing does not lend itself to a traditional feasibility report because it's funded in a different way and the income that is generated is usually so low that the project would never appear to be feasible. The E finding for the not-for-profit affordable housing is usually met by determining the crucial number of units that are necessary to reduce the development cost per unit low enough to fit within the range that funders use to determine which projects to fund. This range is their feasibility range and a way of keeping the cost per unit down and efficiency high. We usually ask for an analysis that shows that the development cost per unit of an as-of-right project is too high to qualify for funding because it falls out of the range and is considered too expensive and too inefficient to fund. Then we ask the applicant to show us the number of units that they are proposing and how that really is the minimum number of units necessary to bring the development cost per unit down within the range so that it's acceptable for those seeking funding. When you have a senior center that's part of the project, this drives the development costs higher. And then when it's divided by the as-of-right number of units, of course it results in a higher development cost per unit, which would probably fall outside of the range. As a result, a greater number of units is needed to absorb the additional development costs of the senior center and bring the cost per unit down so that it falls within the range identified by the funding sources. This kind of makes it impossible to meet the E finding for the senior affordable housing. So the analysis really has to be the development cost minus the cost to complete the senior center, divided by the number of units for both the as-of-right and the proposed, in order to determine whether or not the 92 units plus super unit is actually the minimum necessary to have the project attract funding. So basically what I'm saying is the presence of the senior center is distorting the cost of the project and might be leading to the applicant needing a greater number of units in order to satisfy the E finding.
That makes sense, yeah.
I would like a little bit more clarification in terms of how the existing Catherine Sheridan Residence 1 use and how much of co-sharing of the spaces with the new facility will be, and if that is also...
Say that one more time?
The Catherine
Sheridan
Sheridan 1
one.
building,
Yeah.
what are the uses currently provided, senior center uses, and And, or will they be sharing, because this was a much older building and programmatically things have evolved, and it's possible that this new building might be providing uses that would be more shared with both the Sheridan One and the new building. So I would like to get a better understanding of that. And even though in the statement, the applicant has stated that the current regulation would not require parking for Catherine Sheridan 1, and therefore they're withdrawing the earlier BSA application, there are still residents who are going to have their parking spaces. That's not going to go away. So I'm assuming that this parking space will accommodate those few residents that still have cars, will be parking there, in addition to those who will be living in this new facility. And what is that number that is achievable? As I was talking about the playing around with the layout, one of the things I was thinking of is, I think you mentioned that also, is that instead of the senior center being in the rear, why can't it be in the front with a little bit of a drive-through from the side with parking in the back? And that may accommodate the senior facility being more in the front of the building.
Well, that's the as-of right, has it.
But they have it
along bar.
partially, both in the front and the
Oh.
cellar, right here.
Right.
And if that's
On the
possible,
second.
and with just like a drive-through, just enough to get to the back where you have the rear and then you come out. If that's possible, and that can minimize the issues that the applicant is hearing today about how much deference one extend, and would that minimize that with regards to senior. And it goes back to the thing of, would it allow for a floor that on the second, third, and fourth, you can add additional units on those floors, and then have the sixth and, you probably won't even need, I was just doing a very quick
Wouldn't need 7.
calculation, you won't need 7, you can even have a 6th floor that is set back from the lot line, from the side lot line, and you can still get the total number of units. I don't know whether one would get the same distribution of the unit types of studios and one bedrooms, because that is also integral to the cost of the unit. So I would like more clarification on that.
Any other comments all the way down to D? I mean, yeah, E.
E.
Okay, so then, with respect to seeker, there are open.
Sorry, can I go back to one? I don't know to what extent this application is under review at HPD, and I would like to get some sense if HPD, in its review, especially the financial review, where they have weighed in, and I think that may also help in responding to some of
Right.
our.
I mean, I think that little financial report basically talked about conversations they had with HPD, but it's not that the project's been funded. That was, the idea of getting this financial letter was to understand better, but I don't think we did, from a person who underwrites these kinds of projects for these not-for-profit housing developers, where they figure, these are the funding sources. These are the rules, like they talked about the bond financing and the 4% versus the 9% low-income housing tax credit systems. They talked about those kinds of things, but when an underwriter is figuring it out, they say, we're gonna get this percent from these guys, this percent from these guys, this is the way those guys fund, these are the rules, this is this much per unit, or however they figure it out, or this many dollars per project, however they figured it out. And then maybe they play in a factor like the likelihood of getting these based on current climate and all of that stuff. And so I think what we really wanted to do was have a real underwriting analysis, and not sort of this general summary of, which is a conclusory summary that doesn't really put the pencil on the chart, on the grid, and figure out exactly how much this is going to cost, how it's going to be paid for, all that sort of stuff. I think we really need that as a basis to understand the critical mass, and ultimately then what's the minimum variance for the E.
Right, and usually what we do get in the analysis is like To build this project with 64 units would cost about $450,000 a unit. To build this project at 92 units would cost about $375,000 per unit. Usually, these projects receive funding if they're between $350,000 and $380,000 a unit, so therefore the 92 units falls within that, but the 64 does not, and is not likely to attract the financing.
Right, but the 64 doesn't, and the 94 does, or whatever the number is, but then what about an 80 unit?
Sometimes
right?
they'll say,
Yeah.
they'll give us a list, at 64, it's like 450,000, at 75, it's like 425,000 a unit, at 80, it's like 400, that they'll give us that
Yeah, yeah.
cascading kind of analysis that gives us an idea of the impact of the number of units in bringing the overall costs down.
Right, okay. Because basically, there's the economy of scale, because you still have to put in elevators, and you
Right.
still have to have lobbies, and some of those things just have to be built no matter what. Right, okay. But of course, there's also, as a building gets larger, those additional costs, so they should explain why that's offset by, that doesn't increase the costs in a way that zeroes out or sort of nullifies the additional units, right? The value of the additional units. Okay, with respect to seeker, there are open questions about open space that were posed by the Department of Parks. That's another reason why I don't understand why there isn't any open space being provided for the residents here. Nothing quite so sad as putting your lawn chair in a parking lot. And E designation is also proposed for air quality, but DEP's letter seems to indicate that including natural gas for HVAC in the project would satisfy the requirements, so I don't know why you need that.
That is odd.
Yeah.
It's a fully residential neighborhood.
Well, they're looking at whether the air quality would be affected by the building. So obviously, if you add the wrong types of combustion, you're affecting air quality. I think that's just generally an approach now for carbon emissions and, a little bit of effort to reduce the gases. And also, there's a DEP letter from last week that requires that a Phase 2 work plan be prepared, so we need all that stuff.
Well, that's what the E designation is for.
Oh, that's what the E
The
designation?
request was sent to DEP for an E.
So to not have to do that.
Well, they would have to do it, but it wouldn't have to be contingent on the grant.
Okay. So I know the DEP, DEP's been a little reluctant to give E designations before some amount of analysis is done. I just don't know at what level. Okay. Okay.
This is the conclusion of the review session for the September 26, 2017 public hearing of the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals.
Thank you.